All right, well, thank you all for standing by. Welcome to today's presentation, Introduction to Safety Management. This is the second of our three-part series on the fundamentals of safety management that addresses the observational safety. We will be having Q&A at the end of our presentation. You can always submit your questions anytime via the questions panel. It's on the right side of your screen, or it may have floated up to the top. There is an orange arrow that you can click on to open it up. Feel free to submit those again anytime. Let's get started. Presenter today is Steve Powers. Steve brings more than 30 years of professional safety experience, beginning his occupational safety and health career in the workers' comp insurance industry. He later landed his dream job as safety manager with the Federal Aviation Administration flight program. He received numerous awards for outstanding employee contributions and superior service. Steve retired after 20 years with the FAA. His education includes an engineering degree from Oklahoma State University, as well as a certified safety professional. I'd now like to turn the program over to Steve.
Thank you, Christy, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Observational Safety and its Value to Improving Organizational Goals. Interesting topic. Let's start with a disclaimer. We have to do this because you know that everything that we say can and will be used against us. So here's a disclaimer. These are our recommendations. This is a subject that there's not regulation on. So it's based upon studies, and it's based upon safety management experience. My experience with the FAA gave me an opportunity to use some observational safety strategies. So we do not warrant that all loss and claims will be avoided if this program is followed. And by providing this information, we do not intend to relieve you of your own duties and obligations. So thank you for your attendance today, and it's going to be an interesting subject. This is what we'd like to discuss today, is to define safety culture. We'll learn that observational safety is part of a safety culture process, and we'll look at if your organization is ready for doing safety culture management. Behavior-based safety management is what it's called. We'll talk about risk perception and the different perceptions that people have of risk. We'll describe how to cultivate or grow and nurture a safety culture. And we'll describe behavior-based safety concepts and give you the big picture and see maybe where are you, is your organization ready for something like this? Or maybe you're well into it and mature and making great strides with it. And then we'll get into the details of the employee observation methods and techniques. And then we'll discuss some of the pitfalls of the observation method. So we're going to start with a poll, number one, and I'm going to hand this back over to Christy.
Okay, I'm going to launch the first poll here, and it may take a second to get to you, but we're just asking here, and it may take a minute to read this, which best describes your organization's safety culture. So are you one of those who cares as long as we're not caught, or safety is important and we do a lot when we have an accident? Or maybe you're one of those that says we have systems in place to manage the hazards. Again, you're only choosing one here. Safety leadership and values drive continuous improvement. Or maybe your motto is safety is how we do business around here. So try to select just one of those. I'll give you guys a few seconds here to get your votes in. I know some of you may have a couple of them, but just try to choose one, and we'll close up the results here in just a second and share with everyone. Okay, I've got about 75% of you voting, so I'm going to wrap up the vote here and share. So, well, I'm glad to see that we have 0% who said who cares as long as we're not caught. 22% of you said safety is important and we do a lot when we have an accident. 30%, we have systems in place to manage hazards. 30%, safety, leadership, and values drive continuous improvement. And 17%, safety is how we do business around here. So thank you all for participating today.
I'm always impressed by the audience in these polls and how well developed some of your programs are. And so obviously the goal would be to that the answer would be D. I think there was D or E. The last one is how we do business around here. So this is a illustration from the Hearts and Minds Toolkit, if you're familiar with that. And it shows a progression of a safety culture. As you start, you may be at the pathological level, which is who cares as long as we're not caught. And then as we move up the ladder, you can see the improvements that we are reactive and we do a lot, kind of like when people see a cop car, they slow down. That's the reactive type of safety culture. Calculative is more of you got people doing risk assessments and you're actually managing hazards through risk assessment. And proactive is you have a continuous improvement program. So you have metrics and you're actually measuring certain things of your safety program performance. Generative, how we do business around here, means sustained proactivity. So because a lot of times proactivity could be the flavor of the month. So a sustained safety culture has the engines in them that keeps it going and they don't run out of gas. So some really basic information to start with. What causes injuries and illnesses? Unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. This is what I was taught 35 years ago when I started my safety career. And I was taught that it wasn't 88%. I was just taught 80, or that's what I remembered, is that 80% of all accidents are caused by unsafe acts. And then 12% would be unsafe conditions. Now we have a lot of new knowledge about what causes accidents and incidents and people getting hurt. We use the Swiss cheese model, and all of these things have to line up before there is an incident, somebody's hurt. But I still think that unsafe acts is the leading cause, and if we can get to those, and it's hard, it takes to get into people's minds and change their values and attitudes and behaviors is a very tough job. So that's what we're focusing on, is the unsafe acts. Unsafe conditions are pretty easy to control. I mean, especially if you have the resources and you can improve your facilities and your equipment. You can do machine guarding and you can do whatever technologies there are available, lift tables and such. But and you try to reduce the human error factor. But you can't always. There's always going to be a human at that workstation, probably until we're fully automated with robots. But we will always have humans interfacing with processes. So that's what we're looking at, is trying to identify that unsafe behavior, and that's what observational safety does. So what is safety culture? It's the collection of the beliefs, perception, and values that employees share in relation to risk with an organization such as a workplace or community. Now, I know in my experience, in my little community of workers, we had extremes. We had 5,000 employees working at the Aeronautical Center, and you had everything, just every trade and every profession you can imagine. And there was a big difference in the perceptions of risk and the value of safety. So risk perception, what I learned is, well, would you swim with a shark? I wouldn't, but there are people who do, right? So even outside of a cage, right? So it's interesting to see people's risk perception, because they think, well, that's not it's not going to happen to me. Or like my younger son will tell me he's always got a backup plan. I said, well, what if you run out of gas? Well, I got a motorcycle. What if your motorcycle doesn't work? Well, I can walk. So there's risk perception is something that we have to deal with, and it is the subjective judgment that people make about the likelihood and severity of an injury or loss. So if we use a risk assessment process, like this one is a risk assessment matrix that we used in the FAA, it helps people get on the same page. So when we look at the different hazards and we come together either as a facility safety committee or in front of management, when I was with senior management, we called it rack and stack. Rack meaning the risk assessment code, and these are codes. So a 1A would be the most dangerous condition you could possibly imagine. And then a 4E would be like, yeah, there's no risk. I mean, there's no way anybody's going to get hurt. And it's unlikely. And even if they did, it's just maybe a little scratch and it's no big deal. So using risk assessment tools will really help people get on the same page. And I used it. For example, here is a RAC, a risk assessment code equal to 2A, which is pretty high. And this is a walking surface between a sheet metal shop and the welding shop, which is right there to the immediate left. And then in the foreground is an aircraft hangar. And so, this is $100,000 back injury, and that's just one person. There could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people that try to walk across that and they slip and fall. So obviously in an emergency or an urgency, you don't have time to do risk assessment. You just get on the phone, you call somebody to bring in some ice melt, and then you put up your barriers, to prevent people from going there. But just as an illustration, I want to show you how I used those RAT codes. And then on the right is just some housekeeping practices that has much less of a risk associated with a 3C. Not likely to cause a problem, but people can still get in there and they're looking for something. Maybe it's an older elderly lady that's working there. She's not strong enough to lift something and one of those chairs falls on her, as she's digging through looking for something. So that's why it's coded and assessed. So what is risk perception? Well, this is the example of if you had 9 employees and you surveyed them and you said, well, what height can a fall cause injury? Employee 1 may say, oh, 6 feet. I know that I've fallen from less than 6 feet and I didn't have any problems. Another employee may say 4 feet. Another one may say 2. Hey, I can't fall more than 2 feet. I will hurt myself. And then you had people like me when I was younger that I could jump off a roof and learn how to roll when I landed. So I could jump 10 feet and not hurt myself. But the good thing here in the illustration is OSHA, federal OSHA, draws the line. And they said 4 feet for general industry, it's 6 feet for construction industry. So at 4 feet or higher, if an employee is working outside of a standard ladder or standard railing, then they have to have either personal fall protection or a net or some other restraining device. So the point here is that OSHA or a regulation can help risk perception. It can say, well, I don't care if you say that you can survive a fall from 10 feet. We have to comply, and we have to do it at 4 feet. So that kind of helps the culture say, oh, okay, I guess so. We don't have a choice. So how do we cultivate safety culture? Well, it's to recognize the powerful influence of observational learning and consistently setting safe examples for each other. And we often will see working together is the ideal situation to observe each other and to offer suggestions on how to do something safer. Like in this example, there's team lifting. So if you set an example, you encourage or you inspire people by your behavior to behave or act in a similar way. And to behave in a way that shows other people how to behave, it's up to you to set an example. And this is from Scott Geller, is a psychologist that has been a practitioner of safety management and behavior-based safety. And I've used some of his information, some of his notes, and some of his knowledge, which he's a leader in behavior-based safety management, in my opinion. I know there's others. Peterson is another example of a psychologist that does the psychology of safety. So a lot of the information I have here is from him. And this is, I think he gave like 7 or 8 points here that I'm gonna cover pretty quick. And I just wanted you to see how to cultivate a safety culture. So lead by example, and then provide routine support for co-workers' safe behavior by delivering sincere appreciation and gratitude for actively caring. Actively caring is something that is very hard for me to do because, and it's hard, I would think, for most human beings. Actively caring means when you see somebody that is working unsafely, you will actually drop everything you're doing if you can, if it doesn't create a hazard, and you go to that person, you say, hey man, you're lifting way too much. Let me help you do that. Or you just stuck your hands down in a waste receptacle that may have sharps in it. Don't do that. This is the way we, recover things. Or so actively caring is engaging, and I'm challenged by it. I like to think that I'm a good person, that I actively care for people, but when I really test myself, like I saw my neighbor doing something in his yard, and I thought, that was stupid. I don't know why he did that. And he was using gasoline cans for ballast on the back of his aerator. He was aerating in his yard, and I thought, wow, I mean, he's got like 25 gallons of gasoline on the back of his tractor. So but again, challenging is I didn't go talk to him. And that I basically sat back and thought, shook my head. So how to cultivate a safety culture: promote and support a process that encourages employees to continually submit feasible considerations to a company-wide safety suggestion box. I think in our last webinar, I think we polled and saw how many folks, and you may be some of the same folks that did the safety committee webinar, but a lot of you are using suggestion boxes, and I recommend those. Those are great places because they can be anonymous. And now here's the key. We had them at the FAA. We had drop boxes in the different buildings, and they were lock and key. They had cards that were pre-made, and you didn't have to sign your name, but you could just say, hey, this chemical storage cabin over here in Hangar 9 is terrible. Look how unorganized it is, and there's labels missing. We have no idea where to find things. So that goes into a card, and it's processed usually by the safety department like me, and I go to those supervisors that are responsible for those cabinets and say, hey, we got a safety suggestion, and then they get on it. And so there's the before and after. And the after is very important. If that's the nurturing and the cultivating is when employees are offering suggestions to improve the workplace, really work on them. I mean, do them if they're feasible. Obviously, rearranging a chemical storage cabinet wasn't that hard to do. It might have taken 15 minutes of somebody's time, but it was what it did is it showed, hey, I do make a difference. The guy who submitted it saw it later and thought, hey, this is working, and it gains momentum. It has inertia as more and more employees engaged, but they won't if your organization does not respond either quickly, or they just blow it off and say that's not necessary. There's risk perception. There's not a hazard there. So there is a fine line, because we had employees that I thought were way over the top, and I couldn't see that it was feasible for us to do some of the things they wanted to do. And basically, I just explained to them, well, I would go back to those employees and say, what's the hazard? And they would have to tell me, they would have to describe to me how somebody could get hurt based on this suggestion that they've got. So what is behavior-based safety? It's the behavioral approach to safety management, meaning that there's more than one approach, right? So the old approach that I grew up in, and I don't know how much it's taught these days, but remember, I started my career in the 80s. And so we were taught, especially as an engineer, hey, you engineer hazards. You develop, you design, and you operate technologies that reduces the risk of human error. But the reality is you just can't take the human factor all the way out of our processes. So this behavior-based safety got really popular by people like Scott Geller and Dan Peterson, and it's based on a larger scientific field called organizational behavior management, which has been around for a while, at least since the 50s and 60s. And it is a process that creates a safety partnership between management and employees that continually focuses people's attentions and actions on theirs, others, and their daily safety behavior. It is recognized if you deal with any of the safety management standards like the OSHA. The OSHA has a program management guideline that it's not required, federal OSHA, but they have a guideline for general industry and construction. And the other standards, the ones that I used, were the ISO 18001 and the ANSI Z10. These are safety management standards, and they emphasize this thing about partnership with management and communication and getting employees involved in safety. So that's what the behavior approach is, to look at the behaviors of employees and see if they can be modified to improve the workplace. Now, on the hierarchy of controls, and this comes from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, which is under the CDC. This hierarchy of controls, I have really used this a lot, and it is helpful if you can get your mind wrapped around this and just use this every time you see a hazard. And then once you get it, teach your coworkers, hey, let's go through the hierarchy of controls. Can this be eliminated? That's the most effective. In other words, do we really have to do this? Can we just, you know, can we transfer that risk to some other method? Substitution is the next best thing, and the thing that the application of that in my experience was with chemicals, and we would use methylene chloride for stripping paint off of airplanes, and it's very dangerous. It's a carcinogen, but we found there were other suitable substitutes available, and the EPA has a list of them, and you just go to the EPA website and you say, hey, I need to strip paint, and they say, here's some, you know, some eco-friendly chemical alternatives. Engineering controls, and which is what I explained earlier about basically reducing the human error factor. And then there's administrative controls. So we're getting less and less effective in our controls. Administrative controls are training, teaching people how to do things. And if they don't do it right, there's a good chance that they're going to hurt themselves. And that's where behavior-based safety is. It's real low down here on administrative controls, but it's not the lowest. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is considered the least effective control. So depending on how much foam you can put around a person and put them in an explosion-proof room, maybe they can escape danger there. So I just wanted you to see that, because really your efforts should be at the higher level of elimination, substitution, and engineering. But if you're doing all of those controls and you're still wanting to improve, and there's always room for improvement, use a behavior-based safety process like observational techniques. All right, I'm gonna give it back to Christy for our next poll.
Okay, I have launched the next poll. So if you guys want to take a look, how does your organization modify safety behavior? A, do you have a disciplinary action policy, kind of like the 3 strikes and you're out, or accident-free awards program? Maybe you integrate with employee performance appraisals. Maybe you already do the safety observation program, or maybe none of these. Again, we're asking you to choose one. So do your best if none of them are there. And you can always share with me if you'd like on the questions panel. Share with me what you guys do if it's not this. So, all right, I've got about 70% of the votes in. So make a quick selection here and I'll close up and then I'll share the results with everyone. Okay, so 3% of you have more of a disciplinary action policy, 0% have the accident-free awards program, 17% integrated with employee performance appraisals, which is nice, 38% of you, great, are already doing safety observational program, and then 41% of you said none of the above. So I'm kind of curious to see what you guys do if you're not doing any of those, but You can always share those if you'd like through the questions panel.
All right, thank you, Christy. And hey, wow, those, what was it, 30% do have a safety observation program. That's awesome. And for those of you who don't have anything, my recommendation is start with a disciplinary action policy. That's really, that's the old conventional traditional way of safety management, but it applies to, basically every aspect of our work. And the FAA had a very elaborate, probably still does, because it's all under the Office of Personnel Management. OPM has a very elaborate disciplinary action policy for federal employees. And 3 strikes you're out is more common to the smaller employers. So start with the disciplinary action policy and work your way. Safety observation program are great. The employee performance appraisals, that's where I was always trying to get our managers, even our senior managers. I say, hey, put in your manager's performance appraisal some safety metrics that they should hit, and then you could see some changes there. So, all right, try to advance the slide here. Here we go. So what are behavior-based safety strategies? And these are just 4 examples. Stop work. I am very impressed by organizations that have stop work authority. They give their employees stop work authority, which means, hey, I see an unsafe condition. I've been authorized by management that I can go hit that emergency stop button and actually stop. And then, of course, you got to be able to explain, why did you just stop work? Well, there's a hazard right here. And so that's a very good, effective behavior-based safety aspect. Open communication is kind of the standard, just making sure that there is 2-way directional flow of safety information coming from the safety department and then back up to from those people that are working with the hazards. At the FAA, we did safety culture surveys, and we did not do safety observations other than what were integrated with existing things like the annual inspection of a lockout tagout program, where you actually observe the authorized employees de-energizing a machine. So the safety cultures that we did, safety culture surveys that we did, were like a 10-question checklist of things that we would do each year. And that way, and it's the same questions. And one example would be, do you think your manager hears you when you have a concern over a workplace hazard, and does that manager take corrective action? Those kind of questions, which are all subjective based upon that employee's experience with their workplace and dealing with hazards and management. But we did baseline that, and we were able to see improvements or not. We actually had some cycles where the morale was getting bad, and so we had to improve our safety observation program. So what are safety observations? Some of you may be teachers. That's kind of a standard. I think it's a standard. I'm not a teacher. My wife is, and she has told me that she's retired, actually. I better say that, or she'd get all mad at me. But she would say that, yeah, other teachers would come into her classroom and observe her, and she would go into other teachers' classrooms and observe them. And of course, that's done according to some standard that the school used, and it didn't necessarily have safety integrated into it, even though that would be an opportunity for safety, but it's probably more curriculum related. But that's the concept, is you're having somebody observe you in work while you're working, and it's not fun, really. It's most of us are not good at receiving criticism. It should be designed to be constructive criticism and no blame games, but a lot of the times people just feel bad that they messed up or they missed something. So in a safety observation, it's It can be formal or informal, and if you remember that first slide that showed the different, starting with pathological to generative safety culture, the generative safety culture is doing safety observations informally every day, if not every hour, meaning that the employees really care for each other and they have freedom to go up to each other and say, hey, that's not right. Don't do it that way. But the goal here, the objective is to identify unsafe behavior and then reduce it. The peer participation is very important because, again, we're talking about cultivating a safety culture. If it's done by management, that doesn't mean that they need to be excluded, but it doesn't need to be a solely done by management. That looks too much like a management-driven program. And so bottom up is the expression we used to use. And it may improve other things like your quality and your other environmental management programs and quality management programs. And the idea, again, is to promote safety feedback. And so how do these safety observations affect culture? Well, if they're done effectively, it can reduce incidence rates, your OSHA incidence rates. It can reduce your workers' compensation insurance experience modification rate because you have less claims. It can definitely improve morale if you're doing it right because people aren't afraid to come to management and say, there's an unsafe condition here and can we get it fixed? And if management is following through and doing their part, it really improves morale. And it will increase productivity and efficiency. And sometimes that's the hard sell. If you want to do an observational safety program, you have to sell it to management, say, well, how much is this going to cost? How much time? And in 15 minutes, if you want to know the quick answer, how much time to observe somebody. So it can have positive results. You can also have negative ones. So what is safety feedback? Well, it's whenever risky behavior occurs on the job, a coworker is often the best position to see it. So behavior-based safety observations are a great way to get employees involved in safety. And the more employees that are involved in safety, the less risk there is of something going wrong. There's a company called Vector Solutions, and I just quoted them. They're one of several companies, Vector Solutions. They're one of several companies that build software, safety management software, and they have a behavior-based safety piece and an observational safety piece. So if you want to go to the technology level, you can buy that kind of software. And instead of using the old paper cards and pens and drop boxes, suggestion boxes like we used to use, you can actually, the employees can do these observations online on their company issued computers. So informal and formal. So here's an example of something that we want to give some feedback on. A maintenance worker standing on top step of a step ladder. We want to go to him and say, don't do that. Well, he's going to say, if I fall, I've got the ceiling grid that's going to protect me. But anybody of you that knows that ceiling grid, that thin aluminum, I don't even know what kind of metal it is, it's not very strong, and he could fall from that. So give him some safety feedback. How about a distracted driver? Even, if you're a passenger, and you're driving with somebody, hey, and you see them talking on the phone, drinking coffee, whatever, just be friendly. And now you can't pull up next to somebody at a stoplight and say, hey, you're distracted, you're unsafe, because you know what that could end up being like. And so what is safety feedback? A warehouseman that is overexerting. And there's a reason, and if you just go to this fella and you say, well, why are you on that top ladder? You're not even, you're going to fall. You don't have any protection. And he'll say, well, because I got to get to that top box. Well, okay, so let's look at a better way of doing that. And then here's one, is a friend carrying a bicycle downstairs. So often we'll see unsafe behavior like this. I have done this. And so if you have an effective safety culture, this person would not be offended by you telling them, hey, your hands are not free. If you missed a step or if there was something there that you didn't see, you would go down because you don't have any way of supporting yourself but with a handrail. So what are some of the strategies? If you're wanting to put together a formal safety observation program, you should start with performance goals. You should know really, what am I trying to do? Can I measure it? And you want to observe and measure critical safety behaviors at a frontline level, those employees that where the rubber hits the road. And it should be using an approved work instruction. So in other words, in the ideal world, all employees have a standard operating procedure and they are trained according to that. And basically you just, like an audit, you just watch these people and you see if they're doing according to the standard. But unfortunately, the real world says, no, there's freedom and there's liberal options available to allow employees to do work as safely and as productive as possible. It's important to track results because there's going to be a lot of data that's going to be generated. And so like those software companies, that's why they're capitalizing on it, because they know there's a lot of data crunching. And if you don't have a software program, there's going to be somebody sitting at the keyboard a lot. And so another very important thing that we've already discussed. So if we observe the woman carrying her bike down the stairs, it's important to give feedback. So you can't just do an observation, fill out a card, drop it in the box or on the computer and say bye-bye. It's important to give that feedback. And of course, the accountability and responsibility and the management commitment these are the 5 strategies that would be effective in a formal safety observation program. Some examples of performance goals. If you're looking for what do I really want to measure, I mean, most of us would probably start with our intuitive knowledge of the job hazards. But injury illness statistics is a good place to go. You can do your analysis and say you can hone in on a department, or you can hone in on a maybe even a supervisor. That's what I used to do. I would track injury statistics by supervisor, and wow, this one supervisor that I had was highly productive. As a matter of fact, he was the most productive supervisor, but guess what? He also had the highest incidence rates. So that would be a good place to start and focus in on a department that's having some issues. You can use risk assessments. It can be an employee request to do an observation, or it can be a management request to do an observation. So how should they be planned and prepared? Okay, so ideally, in my mind, and the way that I did those was using job hazard analysis. And we had hundreds of JHAs, and we would use the JHAs to generate our standard operating procedures. And then we would develop training around those SOPs. And so if you're going to do a safety observation, it's as simple as taking the JHA with you, and they have to be updated anyway every 3 years. And so you can take a JHA with you and say, watch an employee work and say, you know what, you missed something here. You didn't have the right PPE, or so it's important that the one that's being observed has received that work instruction based on a JHA. If they haven't received the instruction, there could be a lot of safety discrepancies. And maybe that's just the reality, is this person didn't get the training. And so your observation ends up being, the corrective action of your observation ends up being training, or in some cases retraining on the right procedure. So you want to recruit frontline supervisors and peers to be observers, and they need to be trained in how to deal with, how to monitor, how to recognize hazards, and then how to care actively and be sensitive, because we're dealing with people's behavior. And like we said, there could be an employee that's being observed that is afraid that they're going to lose their job because they did something wrong. So there's a lot of training that has to be done up front to ensure that the culture is ready for this, and that it's okay, that what we're doing it's not to blame anybody, it's just to improve our culture. And then you want to use some kind of a checklist or a card or a software application to document the observations. This is the Ohio State University. This is just a really generic looking JHA on the left, and then on the right is a lockout tagout procedure that I wrote for one of our machines in the sheet metal shop at the FAA, and I could use that when I did use that during our annual inspections, and I would observe employees locking out and tagging out equipment. And if they missed, I didn't ding them. Now, we did not have an observation program that was tracked like I'm teaching today, but we did have that inspection program that would document if there was a problem. And if an employee, an authorized employee, could not correctly follow a lockout tagout procedure, they weren't disciplined, they were retrained. And the supervisor, usually I would get the supervisor and say, we need to train this guy as soon as possible. He's using this machine, he doesn't know how to lock it out. Now, Vector Solutions is one of those software companies I told you about, and this is an example. This is a free card that I downloaded from their website. I don't know if I like it necessarily, but this is what they call one of their observation cards. The reason I don't really like it because it looks more like a general safety inspection to me, and this is only very small samples of that checklist. Is actually pretty long. It's like 5 pages or something. The part that I did like was on the right side under policies and procedures, where the policy or the procedure, for example, a lockout tagout procedure is followed. And so anyway, I just wanted to show you, if somebody says, well, what is an observation card? You kind of have an idea. It's just a way to document your observations. How are employees observed? The idea is to interact when nonconformance or unsafe behavior is observed. That's the ideal. Engage supervisors as necessary when there is an imminent condition where somebody could get hurt. And there should be the collection facility that we talked about. How often should employees be observed? Well, informally, daily. That's if you're way up there in your safety culture, you probably are doing them daily as informal ones, meaning there's not an actual card that's being produced and dropped in a box. That's that actively caring safety culture, and they just do it. That's the way they do business, right? We care for each other. Now, the more formal program, which is probably where most of us would have to start, it's the frequency of those observations could be driven by an incentive program. For example, hey, we'll drop your name in the hat if you do at least one safety observation a week. And when we draw names out of the hat every month, you may get a reward or something. So there's an incentive for employees or managers to do safety observations. Now, you may have a policy that says, well, every employee will receive an observation at least once a year. You can have new employees that are observed monthly for the first 6 months. That could be written in your policy. And definitely following an incident, and go to that employee, make sure that they're cared for first on their injury and illness, but then go to that and make sure that that management didn't miss an important part of that job and protecting that employee. So how's data used? Well, it's kind of obvious. You can use it in so many different ways, especially if you're using the software. They give you all kinds of tools to show graphs and stuff. But the important parts here are to credit the observers, the people that are doing the observers, like we talked about with the incentive program, because that is voluntarily they're engaging if you want to make it voluntary. And that's the way I've seen most of them are voluntary, but there is an incentive to do those. And then follow up with observations that resulted in retraining. So this is more work for the safety department or the supervisor. If there is an unsafe behavior that is observed, there should be some follow-up, making sure that that individual is now aware after their observation of how to do a job safely. And definitely share those observations with those employees that were observed and their supervisors. And then the metrics that can be developed, use these as a leading indicator. For example, a metric in a safety management or a safety program performance indicator could be, we're going to try to do 100 safety observations for the year 2021. And let's say at the end of 2021, you got 80. So you got an 80%, and that's good. That's, I mean, you know, because maybe you didn't have anything. And then in 2022, you say, well, we did 80 last year. Well, let's go to 90% this year. And so you continue to move. That's that continuous improvement and looking for opportunities to get better at doing observational program. All right, time for our next poll. I'm going to give it back to Christy.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so our last poll, how would you rate your observation program? So A through E, healthy and productive. B, somewhat productive, could use a little help. Maybe it's kind of middle of the road, sluggish, unproductive. Maybe it's at the bottom and you think, it's kind of a joke right now. Well, then you've got some good room for improvement. Or if you don't have one, just mark E. So go ahead and get in your results or your poll there. And I've got only about 50%. So for those of you that do have a program, please go ahead and vote. We won't report the results to your supervisor, I promise. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it up so you guys can see the results. It's about 70% of you voting here today. All right, 21% of you, good, think it's healthy and productive. Another 21% said somewhat productive, could use a little help. 13% a little sluggish and unproductive. 4% stating it's a joke. Again, I promise we won't tell your supervisors. And then 42% of you right now don't have one, so you're in a good place. Thanks for participating. We appreciate that.
All right. Well, hopefully those 40% that don't have one, you can use some of this information to help you get started. And we had 20% on the healthy and productive and 20 on the somewhat productive, but could use a little help. That's great. You guys are, you're ahead of most, whoops, I'm trying to advance slide. You're ahead of most safety cultures if you're truly at those places where you say you are. So here's 10 pitfalls. Lack of management commitment. Obviously nothing happens without management support, right? I mean, we all know that. And if management's not setting a good example, if they're pencil whipping or they're walking through the work site and they're really not even behaving safe themselves, you know, I have had to do that. It's hard to do, to sit down with a senior manager and say, boss, when you walk through the plant, you really need to have your PPE on and stay in the walking areas. Don't just be getting out there because you're the boss. So the observation program should not be punitive. If workers see that the program is punitive, it's another way to catch and punish them for doing something wrong, and then it will fail. That would be pretty obvious, right? You don't want to punish people for doing volunteering and being part of this program. Now, another pitfall is, and I've heard, you can imagine hearing this from management that is trying to cut costs and control costs, is like, we don't have time to do this. Why is it all of a sudden more important than productivity? It's like, if we don't produce a product or service in a reasonable amount of time and at a reasonable cost, then we can't stay in business. And so, yes, there's that constant challenge. And so it should be balanced. Safety and productivity should be balanced. Now, another pitfall is an observer that just got off the map and did his or her own thing and did not follow the observation practice method that they were trained on. Another failure would be not acknowledging safe work practices. So again, it's easy to see the negative, right? I mean, it's so easy for us to see what's wrong. It's hard to see what's right. So make sure that we're constantly giving credit where credit's due. And that's positive reinforcement of safe behavior. A couple more are not gathering relevant data. In other words, just not getting information that could be useful and tracking, for example, a department or a particular job or a work area or a particular task or a particular supervisor. So failure to track observation results is I mean, that's really kind of the purpose. We're trying to build a database of, that's, you can almost say, hey, I got a database that shows my safety culture, and we are either doing these things or we're not. And the last two, not sharing data results. So obviously they would need to go all the way up to senior management and all the way down to everybody and post them, make them public. And of course, you got to watch out for the anonymous and the other policies that need to be considered when you're posting results. You don't want to really post individual results. You post general statistics on the safety observation program. And you got to be careful not to create an unhealthy competition with quotas. So if a supervisor says that, I got to do 10 observations a year, and I've got 100 employees, and another supervisor says I got to do 10 a year and I have 10 employees, that's not fair. Or they're the employees the peers that are doing observations, they have more time to do them. That's unfair because and their name's dropping into a hopper and they're going to get a reward because they did 20 observations this year, but there's other people that just have not had the opportunity. So it can create an unhealthy competition or a quota, so be careful of those things. In summary, an employee observation program is a BBS. Behavior-based safety is an application of a larger scientific field called organizational behavior management. The employee observation program is low on the hierarchy of controls, but it has showed positive results in capable organizations. The objective of the observations is to modify the unsafe behavior, and not with a paddle. And so here's some resources that I use in putting together the presentation. You feel free to take a look at those, and like Christy said, that this will be available, because I'm not going to stay on the screen very long, but this is going to be available to you as a download, a PDF, I guess. And it's time for questions, so I'm going to go back to Christy. Thank you for your attention.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve, for a great presentation today. Definitely appreciate a lot of information we actually haven't heard. We haven't had a presentation on organizational behavior and safety. So thank you so much for that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So I'm going to ask those, and then we're also going to talk about our next webinar that's coming up. I know many of you are having issues with getting your management on board. So maybe you have any tips for getting your management team on board with this?
Yes, management getting on board is a huge challenge, and especially if they know the hierarchy of controls and know that this isn't the most effective thing that could be doing, and they're thinking, why don't we do some of these other things that are more effective? So again, if your organization's not ready for it, then I wouldn't push it too hard. So make sure that you've got some other things in place. But another great way to get management buy-in is to get, if you have safety committees, to use your safety committees and let that be a topic of discussion, and see if the safety committees are interested. Those are going to be the people in your organization that care the most about safety and have the most energy and enthusiasm, and they might be able to say in a consensus, they might say, yeah, let's do observational safety. And so then that safety committee, if it's structured correctly, that goes up to management, and management has to consider those things, and usually they will bend a little bit. So that's a couple strategies.
Okay. Good information. I haven't heard that before, kind of a strategy of using your safety committee. What is the best way to measure safety culture? This is kind of a tough one. What's the best way you found with working with the FAA?
Well, the way we did it was we did those annual safety culture surveys, and I think that's the easiest way to do it. Put together a 10-question survey and give them a multiple choice, like Christy when she polled you today. Give them choices, and then take those, and if you've never done them, that becomes your baseline. And you can even grade them. You can say, well, 50% of our participants agreed that management supports safety and will lend an ear to an employee, that there's an open door policy and employees can come in and share freely without reprisal. But the other 50% obviously is not in that condition and does not feel free to bring suggestions to management. So that becomes a metric. You can say 50% on that one question out of 10, and you can say we're going to improve that. So let's improve that. Let's try to get at least 10% next year. And of course, then that becomes a management plan that says, hey, managers, we need you to open up your door, open door policy. So that's one example. Hopefully that'll give you something.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done these before with some of our clients, and I think they found it very, very beneficial to understand, wow, we didn't realize that the perception of safety in our organization was a little lower than we thought. And so they realized they had some work to do. And then some were surprised that it was even higher. So again, you're not sure what you're going to find out, but it's definitely worth investigating. All right, I do want to remind everyone the presentation's been recorded, so you will receive a link this afternoon in an email. The email will also include a link to download this PowerPoint presentation. Warning, it is a rather large file, but it's a clearer file than the one I have attached. Our next webinar is June 9th, and that is on effective communication, and I will be presenting that one. So join me for that. If you have any questions or maybe a question that wasn't answered, please feel free to submit that at any time. riskcontrol@alliant.com is our email address. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And of course, you can look at the recording or share it with any of your colleagues that you think may benefit from it. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Steve, for a wonderful presentation today. We hope to see you in June. Thanks.